I have very vivid memories of browsing game shops as a child. Even if I wasn't buying anything, just looking at all these games really stirred my imagination. This was the late 90s, and I was about 5 or 6 years old, back when I thought PCs were nothing more than Microsoft Paint machines. So I had no real way of finding out what a game was about other than looking at the box art. I remember looking at them and making up a story for it in my head about what cool adventures I'd go on when I finally got my hands on it. It was the next best thing to playing it at the time. I learned about a lot of games this way. I'll never forget the box art for Silent Hill 3 just giving me the creeps, and it was Metal Gear Solid 2's cool art style that made me pick it up. 20 years later, and the Sons of Liberty to pretentious YouTuber pipeline is a well-observed phenomenon. Of course this did lead to me making some really bad purchasing decisions, but some of them I sadly wasn't allowed to pick up. My parents were super strict on age restrictions at the time. I had only just started primary school in the early 2000s, so they didn't want their daughter playing Custer's Revenge or whatever. Sadly, this led to me missing out on a lot of great PS1 games. While I would pick up a lot of these games later, like Resident Evil 2 or Final Fantasy 7, one I never actually visited until recently was maybe the most me game on the PlayStation: Medievil. Hey, I'm Heather, and welcome to Retro Relapse's Halloween Special. Wait, what month is it? Oh shit, quick, fuck. Heathervemberweens. This video contains scenes of millennial angst and snark. Medievil is an action-adventure game released in 1998 as an exclusive for Sony's PlayStation. 2 years out from the release of the PS2, Sony was setting the world on fire with games like Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy 7. So I think it's fair to say that Sony were doing alright for themselves. What propelled the PlayStation to sales figures and a pop culture relevance not seen before was the abundance of high quality exclusives, especially when compared to the dire wasteland of exclusives for the Sega Saturn and the Nintendo 64. Yes, said it! Fucking fight me, you prick! I swear to this day, if you asked 10 people to tell you their favourite PS1 exclusive, you would get 10 different answers. And everyone has their favourite weird PS1 hidden gem. Medievil is one of those highly regarded PS1 cult classics. So much so that Sony basically just released the exact same game 20 years later, but more on that in a bit. Medievil was met with positive reviews and strong sales, but the development of the game was somewhat troubled. In 1995, Chris Sorrell, best known for his series of James Pond video games, joined Millennium Interactive, a little-known developer working out of Cambridge, UK. His original idea was an arcadey game, sort of like Ghouls and Ghosts if it was directed by Tim Burton. As development progressed, they decided on a more role-playing style of gameplay. Money was tight though, and Millennium was quickly running out of funds. After interest from the likes of Sega and Microsoft, Sony approached Millennium to develop the game as a PlayStation exclusive. While this might have helped ease their financial problems, it didn't really change the fact that the team had no idea how to make this sort of game work in 3D. This was still the early days of 3D after all. Thankfully, the team were able to play beta versions of Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot to get their bearings on 3D space. And according to Sorrell, Sony's request to include analog support was a major help in the team learning how to make things run smoothly in 3D. Their hard work paid off because, as previously mentioned, Medieval still has a cult following to this day and has spawned a sequel as well as 2 remakes. I had never played Medieval until recently, so this was a project I really wanted to work on. Medieval is such a cult game and it feels like something I really should have played by now. While it wasn't the biggest game on the PlayStation, it seems like everyone raves about it these days, at least in my circles. I'm 20 years removed from the game's release, and I only really have nostalgia for the box art, so it got me wondering, does Medieval hold up? Well, let's talk about that. Medieval makes a goddamn fucking incredible first impression. By far the best out of any game I've played on this channel so far. The way Medieval opens up with a camera panning through a graveyard showing us spooky stuff like a spider and a skeleton, it makes a clear statement of intent. I've always said, and will continue to say until the cigarettes take me, every part of a video game's aesthetic, even the menus and the intro, should be evocative of what that game is about. They should be cohesive. Persona 5 is probably the most well-known example of this today, and Medieval passes this with flying colours because it is Halloween as shit and I love it. And this is like totally a Halloween game, right? Like, I know this is a Halloween special, or was supposed to be, but I need to point out how much I love the Halloween aesthetic this game is going for. I love the spooky graveyards and the cobwebs and this big doofy skeleton. I just want to give him a big hug. I love it, top marks, it's credible and I adore it. These high standards are kept throughout the game's opening cinematics. We're told the story of the Battle of Gallowmere, where the dark wizard Zarok and his demonic hordes were beaten back by the armies of Sir Daniel Fortescue, a brave knight who fought valiantly and tragically died of his wounds in battle. To this day, Sir Dan is lionized with the citizens of Gallowmere as their great hero, and it looks like the world may be in need of him once more. Zarok is back again with a horde of undead to once again try to conquer the realm. Sir Dan, being resurrected, is the one last hope standing in the way of Zarok's evil armies. And then the game goes out of its way to show you that Daniel Fortescue was not a brave hero of the realm who fought to the death. He was killed in the first round of arrow fire before the melee had even started. In Scotland we call this James the Fourthing. And this is the second thing I really like about Medieval. It is funny as fuck. Sir Dan isn't a bad dude, he was in some poorly placed arrow fire. I mean, it's happened before, the kings no less. But everyone in this game either intentionally or unintentionally just roast this poor guy to death for it. You literally can't take 2 steps out your crypt without these guys in the wall calling you cowards and a dickhead and a Tory. There's a real wit to all of this, and I honestly feel really bad for Dan. Like, the guy's lost an eye and a jawbone, he can't even fire back properly, but these heads just hit him with pure vicious patter and I love it. So how does Medieval play? Oh god, the voice acting is wonderful too. Not only are the performances here great, but every character, even the minor ones, have a real charm to them. They're just complete dickheads. The absence of music while they speak and the reverb in their voice also makes them sound a little creepier than they otherwise would, and you can tell the designers had a wonderful time making this. And like, there's a real undercurrent of cynicism to these performances too. Every character in this game seems to be, at best, accepting of the fact that this world is capital F fucked, and the fact that you're the only hope makes them laugh at the absurdity of it all. In fact, characters in this game laugh a lot. You know, it reminds me of something. The lack of music during dialogue, the cynical tone, the dark atmosphere, the constant laughing. Yeah, it's... Wait. I'm not saying Medieval is like Dark Souls, okay? It's just a cool little thing that I noticed, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was just a tiny bit of inspiration here. I'm not saying Medieval is like Dark Souls. I'm saying Dark Souls is like Medieval. And Medieval's gameplay is... The music here is wonderful too. There really aren't many standout tracks you're going to be humming in your head for weeks to come or anything, but it's a wonderful atmospheric noise. You know, the sort of thing you hear in a sort of spooky Halloween film for kids, and really that sums up Medieval's aesthetic perfectly. Halloween. And to be honest, there still might not be a more Halloween looking game on the planet. Not before or since has a game just screamed Halloween. Like, when you go into your local supermarket and they have all the Halloween tat, the pumpkin containers, the cheap goblets with the spider webs on them, the fake cobwebs, all that stuff. It's wonderful. I never really celebrated Halloween as a kid, not in a big way. I was too much of a little shit to have many friends to spend Halloween with, so whenever I think of Halloween, I think of these mildly spooky video games and supermarket decorations. I think of the exact aesthetic that Medieval pulls off almost perfectly. I really just cannot put into words how much I adore Medieval's graphics. While there might be better looking games from a technical standpoint, like Final Fantasy IX will always be my go-to for that, none of them give me the same warm feelings as Medieval. It's a game that fills me with such nostalgia to play, which is weird since I only played it in my mid-20s. There's something universal about this aesthetic. Universal to the point that no matter how much time has passed and how many more polygons we can fit on the flower pots or whatever, Medieval will always look good because it's got a sense of style that is so singular and it pulls it off with such a flourish. Look at the influx of boring as fuck grey-brown shooters we got in the late 2000s, early 2010s. Those games, every single one of them, look fucking awful, and they are aging with every millisecond that passes, because they don't really have much of an art style. They strive for photorealism and they fail on their arse, and time has only made that more and more apparent. Games like Medieval, Symphony of the Night, Super Metroid, all of these games look miles ahead of the games that came years after. Medieval as a game is drop dead gorgeous. It's beautiful, and just to look at, it's a perfect Halloween game. What you want this Halloween, I know it's November, please just kindly fuck off, is to turn off the lights, light a few candles, get a good sound system going, and sit down for some Medieval. Bonus points if you can hear the rain beat in your windows and you have some marshmallows next to you. It's perfect. It's the quintessential piece of Halloween art, and I so wish that I could say that without any caveats. I wish I could just leave it there. Review over, I could just say, you should absolutely play Medieval, and tell you that it's another PS1 classic up there with Resident Evil 2 and Final Fantasy VII. Even when I like a game, I'm willing to point out its flaws, and my recommendations rarely come without one or two asterisks. I deeply care about giving you, my audience, my honest, unfiltered opinion on a game, no matter the critical consensus. Basically, this is just one big way of me leading up to saying that Medieval on the PS1, in terms of gameplay, has aged really poorly. And yeah, you could say that about pretty much every PlayStation game, and you'd probably be right, but Medieval's shortcomings stand out so badly because it contrasts so jarringly with the game's peerless presentation. It's rare that I find a game that looks and sounds this good, and it obviously has so much love and care put into it, and it's just not fun to play on any basic level. So let's start at the beginning. You play as the aforementioned Sir Daniel Fortescue on his quest for redemption. After being roasted by these gargoyles, you're given some time to get used to the controls in Dan's crypt, and you're set off on your quest to kill Zarok. You'll explore a variety of utterly gorgeous areas with a spooky Halloween theme. You'll need to make your way from point A to point B, usually filling out some goal along the way, like collecting 8 spirits of the Grim Reaper or whatever. Throughout each level, as you kill enemies, you'll fill in the percentage bar in the top right, and that is your progress towards the chalice. If you pick up the chalice, then you'll enter the Hall of Heroes once you complete the level. For every new chalice that you get an item, ranging from a hammer that can never break to a bow and arrow, and even an extra health bar. Overall, the minute-to-minute gameplay of Medieval is fine, at least in theory, but in practice, this is where the first problem starts to rear its head. Movement in Medieval isn't the worst thing in the world. It's certainly not as bad as some of its contemporaries, but Dan feels like such a slog to control. I highly recommend you play using the auto run feature, because at least on the PSN version of the game, the double tap to run feature is basically broken. This has its own problems though. Dan will run like a bat out of hell with the analog stick, and he'll only walk at a slower pace with the D-pad. This is like fine usually, but the controls don't really offer that kind of finesse required to really make Medieval feel like a comfortable game to play with any sort of precision. It feels sluggish and slow, and this is par for the course of PS1 games, don't get me wrong, but it's still an issue that is here. Sometimes it can be a real headache to get Sir Dan to be where he needs to be, and that makes combat a real bitch at times. And don't get me wrong, I can cope with some control issues. It's something you will get used to over time, but these controls are absolutely brutal when put up against enemies, because Medieval's combat isn't very good at all. In fact, I would go so far as to say that Medieval's combat was pretty shit even back in 1998. And some reviews in the Times share this opinion as well. Combat has the real potential to be dynamic, and you have a really nice selection of weapons to choose from. You have Dan's trusty sword, which can be fitted with a temporary upgrade to deal even more damage, a disposable club as well as a permanent hammer that can be used to smash smaller enemies and environmental blocks like boulders. There's even like a nice selection of ranged weapons too. The problem is that combat is so simplistic, really boiling down to a standard melee combo and charge attacks. And this is fine again in theory. I mean, a standard combo in Spin Slash is basically the foundation of the Ocarina of Time's combat, which was released in the same year. But Ocarina of Time had two major advantages over Medieval: lock-on targeting and a functioning camera. I've beaten the lock-on targeting thing to death in my Devil May Cry review, go watch it, it's decent, and I even used Medieval as an example of a game that sorely needed it. Dan's ski-like controls don't really allow you to keep track of enemies well, especially not the faster ones, which will totally wreck your shit if you're not careful. It's fine when you just have to run around an area dodging some obstacles during a boss encounter, but when you're totally mobbed by enemies, it's a nightmare to actually hit the enemy you want. But where the lack of lock-on is most sorely felt is with ranged weapons. Dan will automatically lock on to enemies ahead of him, shown with this big glowing wisp thing above their head, but you need to be angled just right in order to actually hit the enemy, which again would be fine if these controls allowed for any degree of finesse whatsoever, but they just don't. There's one boss in particular where you have to use a ranged weapon to hit an exposed weak point, but often this weak point opens out of view of the camera, and you honestly have to just take your best guess as to how you need to angle yourself in order to hit it. And a lot of these issues could be easily resolved with a functioning camera system, but alas, this is a PS1 game. I'm willing to forgive this, if only because I basically can't think of any PS1 game that has a controllable camera that's fit for purpose. There are a lot of reasons why fixed camera angles were used so much in this era. Pre-rendered backgrounds look pretty on average, and developers can frame the perfect shot just the way they want it, and most importantly, it solves the fucking camera issue. Not perfectly, yeah, but it was a functioning bandage over the gaping wound that was the early 3D camera systems. Literally, it took us until the PS2 generation, and even then a few years into it, to figure out that the camera should be controlled with the right analog stick. So I don't blame Medieval for putting the camera controls on the shoulder buttons. That was more or less a standard at the time. Spyro did it, even Dark Cloud did it, and even GTA 3 couldn't figure this out, so I can forgive it. But holy shit, please, developers from 22 years ago, at least make it functional. The camera moves so slowly, and there are certain times where you just can't rotate the camera because it would block the scenery or an object. But the thing is, I really need to see what's over there. So let me see what's over there, without risking taking damage or falling into a water trap or whatever. Why not just snap the camera close to behind us like in the Tomb Raider or something? At least there are certain scenes where the game zooms back to show us the full view of the area we're in, and these scenes are usually, but not always, play really well. And all of this so far is somewhat forgivable. There are frustrating moments in combat, but if you get used to it, you can play Medieval just fine. But there is one unforgivable part of Medieval, the bit that ruins the game more or less completely, and it's the bit that ruins almost every action-adventure game: platforming. There's no nice way to put this. The platforming in Medieval is fucking insufferable, unbelievably bad, and on so many levels as well. This is a game that did not need platforming. It could have just been like a straightforward action game, but the devs had to go and put platforming in the game, and now I'm down one DualShock for me setting it on fire and throwing it into the woods. At best, Medieval has platforming sections which are really bad but manageable. Not fun, not even orbiting fun, but they won't take you too long and are blissfully short. And then there are levels like the Pools of the Ancient Dead. I could write a thesis on how awful this level is. Never mind the part where you have to push enemies off a ledge despite Dan controlling with precision of the Hindenburg. Never mind the enemies that just seem to spawn out of nowhere. The worst part of this level is the platforming around the instant death pits. I have a bit of a vendetta around the concept of instant death pits, mostly because I'm a dumb bitch and I'm bad at video games, but it also means that if your platforming controls isn't up to snuff, it can take a frustrating experience into a blood-boiling one, and Pools of the Ancient Dead is a short level that is padded out by the fact that the platforming is broken. First off, we have Dan's aforementioned complete lack of finesse. Trying to angle yourselves for a jump is a hassle even when it doesn't result in death, but it is insufferable here. You never quite know where you're gonna land, and you also don't even know if you can land. There have legitimately been times where I made jumps, but Dan just drowned in the ground itself. Now this is rage-inducing. You need to make one or two tight jumps here, but Medieval isn't cut out for them. It really reminds me of Kingdom Hearts 1 and how the platforming in that game was notoriously bad, but that game never had instant death pits. I was playing this level at like 2 in the morning to record footage, and never before in my life have I wished harder that I was multilingual, just so I had more ways of telling the game to go fuck itself. Okay, so like, I said there were instant death pits in this game, and like, it's technically only half true. Medieval's death pits don't kill you and send you back to the start of the level. Rather, they fully drain one of your health vials. Health vials are items you can find that permanently increase your health bar by 1, full bar, about 300 health points. So falling into one of these pits doesn't actually instantly kill you unless you're on your last health vial. This seems pretty cool in theory, but here's the kicker. Your health vials don't refill between levels. Not the worst thing in the world, right? A lot of platformers don't refill your health between levels. Spyro didn't. The key difference here is that Spyro was a good platformer, and death in Spyro didn't mean you were kicked back to your last save file. What this means in practice is that between levels you'll save your game and then go back to one of the shorter levels with the multiple health fountains. And by the way, they don't refill your health all the way, just by a set number. Stand in them until the health files are refilled, exit the level, save the game, and then start the next level. This isn't a case of a game being hard, it's a case of a game just being obtuse. And like, I get that a lot of games from this time were obtuse. Remember how in Crash 1 you couldn't save your game unless you collected every box in that level and also didn't die? Yeah, I sure as fuck remember. And that was really bad design then, and it's really bad design now. Medieval has so many moments like this, so many tiny little irritations, so many moments that made me put down the controller with my head in my hands and just scream into the void at how stupid all of this was. Medieval is one of those games that doesn't have one massive glaring flaw that can be overlooked. It's one of the games that has so many little annoyances, so many control problems, so many issues with the combat, so many legitimately cheap deaths, that it slowly becomes unbearable. And I'm really confused, because I think I really like this game. I've made it abundantly clear by now that I think Medieval has massive problems with teeth and 12 legs. Playing this game can be a headache with a heartbeat, but you know, like, it's just too charming to hate. Every time this game made me backtrack just for the privilege of filling my health bars, every time I failed a jump, I was still having fun. I was actually quite enraptured with this game's world, to the point where I couldn't really let it go. The world of Gallowmere is just such a charismatic place, and it's wonderful to inhabit. In my previous Halloween video on Casper, go watch it, it's decent, I spoke about how everywhere looked the exact same, and it was hard to find my way because of that. Medieval has the exact opposite problem. Every area in this game is so unique, even ones with similar settings just feel so individual. Look at this. The stained glass window on the wall turns into a big fuck off demon, then you have to fight it. That is amazing. That's cool as shit. I love it. Look at this thing, it's beautiful. Our people keep inadvertently making fun of Dan for having one eye. That's so great. And there's reason to replay these levels too, because there are hidden side quests that take you to whole new levels. Like that time you give an amulet to a witch and then she shrinks you down and sends you into an anthill to get some amber for her. And don't get me wrong, this level is atrocious and easily the worst part of the game, and I fucking hate it. It's a confusing maze with no map screen, little in the way of lighting, and everywhere looks exactly the same. You could easily spend an hour in here just getting completely turned around by the identical scenery, and the enemies are so annoying and just keep spawning no matter what. They're utterly fucking relentless. But isn't it kinda cool? Dan really does get roped into some shit when he should be resting and taking some time off. He's the put upon every skeleton, and it's a huge part of his charm. He doesn't get much dialogue through the game, but he just seems so fed up of all this shit. He needs a wank, a cry, and a sleep, but he's got to keep dealing with all this shit, and it makes him so easy to root for. Oh, and by the way, your reward for going through the anthill maze is a chicken drumstick that explodes on impact. Isn't that just really cool? Well, less cool is the fact that if you want more ammo you have to go back through the maze again, but nobody's perfect, I guess. So Medieval on PS1 has aged like milk, but there's so much potential here. I really feel like if given the chance, things could be improved radically and we could have a genuine treasure on our hands here. And apparently someone at Sony thought the same idea, and in 2019 we got Medieval, a full-on remake for the PS4. Now I know what you're thinking. Heather, isn't this the second time Medieval was remade? And yeah, you're totally right actually. In 2005, Medieval Resurrection was released as a launch title for the PSP. It got mixed to oof reviews. I was going to cover the game, but I actually lost the UND, so it's basically the same fucking game as the PS1 version. Maybe I'll look at it in the future, but if you don't have a PS4, this is apparently a pretty good way to play Medieval. Although the PSP famously only has one analog stick, so you're shit out of luck with the camera. Medieval on PS4 was released in October 2019, and it's a full-on warts and all remake of the original game, just with more graphics and an extra side quest. It got mixed to oof reviews and was generally well received by the fanbase. If I'm being honest, I could end the review right there because it's literally the same fucking game. I've said some inflammatory things before about warts and all remakes, how they're creatively bereft, a waste of disk space, and really have no value outside of wow, thing I like but prettier. This is most evident in Shadow of the Colossus' 2018 remake, which, while it was probably the best game released that year that wasn't called Hitman 2, was the exact same fucking game I bought on the PS2 and PS3, just prettier. And even then, only sometimes. I'm not saying turn Shadow of the Colossus into a kart racer or whatever, we could have had some real creatively daring changes in the remake. I have my problem with Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, but at least they're a completely different experience than the originals. I am 100% on the side of, if you're gonna give me the exact same game, just give me the original online. And this is my opinion on 99% of modern remakes. So it might surprise you to say that Medieval on PS4 is by far the best way to play this game. And if you want to play Medieval in 2021, get this, it's actually pretty good. Yes, it's the exact same fucking game, but there are two major improvements here: camera and controls. Basically everything I said about the controls and the camera earlier in the video isn't a problem here. Now Sir Dan moves smoothly and with precision, and the camera can be manipulated with the right analog stick. Glad we finally caught up on that one. Overall, this leads to Medieval being far less frustrating to play in the moment to moment, and that's great. It still has little annoyances like the health bottle problem, and the combat is still pretty shit all things considered, but this is a polished way to play Medieval, and I really appreciate the improvements they made. In terms of the audiovisual presentation, things are mostly good. It's really pretty and the soundtrack is as good as ever, but I feel like some charm is missing from the original. The ghostly pianist in the PS1 version was one of the most amazing standout visuals from that era, and in this it's just a dead guy on a piano. And the characters are far more animated now, like the witch who sends you to the anthill, and it just doesn't sit right. She doesn't have the same cynical tone to her, but that's nitpicking and honestly I don't think most people will care. Medieval on PS4 is pretty good, and I liked enough to get the platinum trophy, so it must be doing something right. They even added a little side quest where you have to go backtrack through all the levels to complete mini challenges, and once you finish them all you actually unlock the original game. This is a great addition I wish more remakes came with. I mean, don't get me wrong, you effectively have to play through the game twice to get it, so I don't know if you'll be up for round 3 straight after, but it's nice that it's there. Plus, I really want to emphasize how nice it is to have a Sony exclusive game that isn't a fucking open world game, Jesus Christ. So, should you play Medieval? Well, for the PS1 game that's a question that's kind of difficult to answer, and for the first time I had to give a tentative If you want to play the original game in all its glory and don't own a PS4, you have two main options. You can be a dumb bitch like me and buy it on eBay for idiot money, or you can buy it on the PSN store on PS3 for a very reasonable price. For this price you're not going to get ripped off, and it's a bit of a bargain if you just want to experience the aesthetics of the game. Just be cautious and be aware that you're not buying a 6-star Tokyo Dome classic, and if you have a PS4 then I'd say yes, play Medieval. You can get it super cheap these days, and it comes with a free version of the original game. Plus it's on PSN now, and it seems to be there long term, so if you have that subscription service, then I don't really see why not. Even if you can't stomach the gameplay, you get some pretty visuals and some decent comedy, and some really easy trophies. Medieval's legacy is a weird one in that it seems to stop and start every few years or so. 2 years after the original game we get a sequel that was just as highly received as the first game. I've not played it, but I've heard some good things and definitely want to check it out in the future to see if they fixed any of the issues. And then we hear absolutely nothing until 2005 when Medieval Resurrection was released for the PSP. And then we hear absolutely nothing until 2012 when Sir Dan was a playable character in Sony Smash Bros, battling alongside PlayStation icons as Fat Princess, that one lassie from Heavenly Sword, and Wanker Dante. God, that game sucked. And then we hear absolutely nothing until the remake was released in 2019. And to be fair to Sony, like, this game was remade with love and care, so I can't really call it a rush job. But the extent to which Sony actually want to view Daniel Fortescue as one of their marquee icons is really inconsistent, and I think that's a shame. There's clearly a big fan base for him out there, and plenty of people who really want another adventure in Gallowmere. There were apparently whispers of a remake of the second game, but nothing has been confirmed as of yet. I assume that in about 7 years or so, Sir Dan will raise his eyeless head above the parapet again, and I'm looking forward to it. Medieval, both the old and the new, are imperfect games with a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot of potential here, and I really want to know where they can take that in the future. Hey, thanks so much for watching this belated Halloween video. It's the end of the year now, so I hope you're all having a great holiday, whatever you celebrate. I'll be back in the new year with a very well requested retrospective series. Until then, please like, subscribe, follow me on Twitch where I stream 3 or 4 days a week, and follow me on Twitter. I'm Heather, and I'll catch you later.